Ooh, Charlie's Angels in the background. Love it.
Oh, that's you. No.
I
Does that
have
make me Kate?
What's that?
He's gone.
How are you, Tom?
Hey, how are you, Sil?
I like it
Let's
back.
get that background.
I like it backdrop.
Let's get that background.
You could just
that's
put them
good,
on there.
That's good.
Yeah, you upload
Well,
the
how do you just
picture.
put them on there? When you get done, come over to my house and give me a, I don't know how you, I don't know how
Oh,
you. do it.
Jesus Christ.
Now he's at Friends.
Now I'm at Friends.
Who's the owner?
Oh, there's Poochie, Poochie,
I think that was Fran.
Poochie.
Adorable.
He's the Democrat, don't worry.
We doubt very much whether you'd have a dog that's a Republican. I don't think.
Okay.
Hi, David.
Hey,
Hello,
David.
Where's,
Hey, David. Hello, everyone. Great to see everyone.
Good evening, and we'll expect more people to be signing on. This evening, we're going to be talking about the 5 proposed ballot amendments that's going to be on the ballot. And Sylvia, would you like to lead us off?
I'm going to start backwards. Because
Okay.
it's easier.
Backwards.
I am. I'm going to start backwards because it's easier. I'm going to start with those that are obviously, the first proposal is so dense and so thick. So I'm going to go backwards because I don't think anybody's going to have a problem understanding them. The second proposal is to add an environmental amendment, which.
Which one is that?
You want me to wait? Do you want me to wait?
No. Which one are you doing? Number,
Doing ballot number 2.
oh, not ballot number 2. All right.
Lewis.
Ballot number 2 is an amendment having to do with the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy, full environment, which on its face sounds like a no-brainer. There is a resolution that they want to put an amendment that Article 1 of the Constitution be amended by adding a new section to read, and it would be section 19, environmental rights. Each person shall have a right to clean air and clean water and healthy, full, they must have made that word up, I never heard of it before, environment. Now, that on its face sounds so logical to me that I would think that most people are going to approve of it. Ballot number 3 is an amendment which is asking the people of the state of New York to eliminate the 10-day advanced voter registration requirement. So there is an amendment that they want to put up in section 5 of Article 2 of the New York State Constitution, which now requires that a citizen be registered to vote at least 10 days before the election. The proposed amendment would delete that requirement of 10 days before the election. And the legislature would be authorized to enact laws permitting a citizen to register
Same day.
to vote less than 10 days before the election. So that less than, to me, 10 days before the election would mean probably including up to the day
Yeah.
of the election, okay?
I just wanted to say something about it. This is a much more democratic system than we have right now in New York, which you have to register almost 6 months before before an election to be able to vote in a primary. This one opens up the primary system and the system to a much broader electorate. You could actually, if the legislature follows through, can actually be able to vote the same day. You can go into the voting area and say you want to vote that day.
Which is what I said.
Say yourself a Democrat. It's a much more democratic way of
Right,
doing
the
stuff
only-
done in New
the-
York.
The only tough spot for that is not even going to be for district leaders that go and check out the polls. To me, it means that the Board of Elections will have to probably figure out their own system to double the employment of people on the actual day of election, because people being humans, you know, a lot of people will procrastinate, wake up one day and say, I think I really want to vote today.
Sylvia, it's done in many places across the country. It's not a new,
Yeah,
it's not
look,
a new idea.
I'm not debating it. I'm just saying
So,
that
no, I know you're not.
to me, it's a no-brainer. I think I would be very surprised if this ballot is not passed by the electorate, to be honest with you. The fourth ballot, out of 5, the fourth one would be to repeal the no excuse absentee ballot vote. Right now, if you would delete from the current provisions the absentee ballot requirement that an absentee voter must be unable to appear at the polls by reason of absence from the county or illness or physical disability. That's the reason why you get an absentee ballot right now. And that they want to repeal that completely so that the purpose of the proposal, a voter would be able to say that they want an absentee ballot for any reason, which makes sense to me. You wouldn't have to give a reason.
Again, much more democratic than the existing system.
Agreed. It says the purpose of this proposal is to eliminate the requirement that a voter provide a reason for voting by absentee ballot. The proposed amendment would do so by deleting the requirement currently in the Constitution that restricts absentee voting to people under one of 2 specific circumstances. Number 1, those who expect to be absent from the county of their residence or from New York City, for residents of the city on election day. And number 2, those who are unable to appear at their polling place because of illness or physical disability.
Sylvia De Pietro.
Yes, that's me. Thank you, whoever just said that. So now we're going to go, and I think that's going to be an easy one also, I think, because that's a no-brainer also. Proposal number 5 takes the jurisdictional value that civil court judges have a right to hear cases on and bumps it up, doubles the amount. So for example, right now, when you go to civil court, when you go before a judge in civil court, they're restricted. The highest amount that they can hear is from $1 to $25,000. Now, in today's day and age, the average case, everybody starts off with, 10 million. I hate you, $1 million. 50,000, you're already in Supreme Court. So by doing this, because there's really, I'm gonna tell you as an attorney, our acting Supreme Court judges are civil court judges. And once they get bumped up to acting Supreme Court judges, they can hear a case worth $10 million. I mean, they're now on the level as if they were Supreme Court judges hearing cases. By the time you get to civil court and you become a judge on the bench in civil court, they're not litigating anymore. You know, it's like monopoly money. They're actually, the decision for 25,000 is the same kind of decision the judge can make for 50 or 75,000. So what we're doing on ballot number 5 is amending the Constitution. New York City, this only applies, I believe, to New York City civil courts. That's it.
Correct. There is
According
no
to
civil
this.
court elsewhere.
Not a court elsewhere, correct, sir?
That's right.
Okay.
This applies
This
to
is
us.
only New York City, so whatever goes off in Buffalo, Hudson County, or another county, this is just New York City will have this amendment on their ballot. And to me, that makes sense too. Because our civil court judges are very smart. The difference between 25,000, 50, and even 100. I would have bumped them up to 100, but of course, nobody came and asked me. Our civil court judges are very, very smart people. They can litigate cases, and they do litigate cases. So now we get to that wonderful proposal number 1, which when I went down and started to read it, it's maybe worth 15 pages. I'm going to go through this as fast as I can. And I've got a lot of yellow lines here, so bear with me. I'm going to read here what they want to amend. And it seems to have this amendment number 1 seems to have an agreement right now by both houses, the Senate, and it appears to me the Assembly have both agreed to this proposed amendment already. But it's still got to be approved by the people. And it's amending the apportionment and the redistricting process itself, the way they go about doing it itself. It's an amendment that would repeal portions of the state constitution adopted by the voters just in 2014. So I don't know what happened here, but I remember in 2014, there was something that was smacked together on the backside of one of our petitions. It was one of those years we had a long petition. So we're amending something that's 7 years, that's going into its 7th year, that created the actual commission that redistricts. So what we're doing is amending that redistricting commission itself, the meat and potatoes, to allow the redistricting commission to appoint 2 executive directors by a simple majority vote without consideration as to party affiliation of the individuals being appointed. The amendment would eliminate the alternative process currently in place right now that allows for the appointment of co-executive directors and co-deputy executive directors by the legislature should the redistricting commission fail to appoint these directors and remove a requirement that 2 executive directors of the redistricting commission be members of different political parties. So that means they can be of the same party. It's going to freeze the number of state senators at the current number right now of 63. Currently, under the state's constitution, the number of senators was originally set at 50 and thereafter increased over time to 53. This amendment in part wants to now freeze it at 53, not go higher. It also wants to require
63. 63.
63, it says in the
It says-
ballot.
Did I say 53?
Yeah,
I meant 63. Well, that's because I don't have my, yeah, it's 63. Thank you. Whoever Thomas Weir is and Luana, thank you. Every time I say 53, understand I mean 53, 63. It wants the state assembly and the Senate district lines to be based on the total population of the state and require the state to include all residents, including non-residents and Native Americans, if the federal census every 10 years fails to include them. So that means if we have a census that's taken, for example, we just took the census last year, and say the census takers can't get into the Native American areas, and that depletes, that pushes our numbers down, okay? Our amendment wants to be able to include those Native Americans and also any non-citizens. So whoever's in the state of New York that is not a citizen, either of the state of New York or possibly of America, how I read this. Am I right on this, Louis? Because non-citizens means non-citizens. You're either a citizen of the United States or you're not a citizen of the United States, okay? So New York wants to count those people for the purpose of this new amendment.
I think they're already counted, but it's just putting it into the Constitution. I think that's the way the census works now. I think they're already counted. They're just actually ratifying it as law.
Well, so I
My
think that
understanding.
the issue also, Joe, if I may, is that the federal census provides us data that we use for all of our redistricting, right? And so the Census Bureau is permitted to determine whether for the purposes of apportionment, right, which is the determination how many members of Congress we get, they're going to count non-citizens. And so if we were to get a Republican president again, who made that determination, this would guarantee that we would add those individuals back for the purposes of state Senate and state
Right.
Assembly.
Right, and not lose, and also not lose representation. I believe, am I right? Did we lose?
Yes, Sylvia, we lost one congressperson.
Right. And so by counting these individuals, we stand the chance of not losing. It also provides that incarcerated people would be counted at the place of their last residence and not the residence of the jail in which they're located right now, anywhere in the state of New York. So those people at Rikers Island, if they lived in another state, say Connecticut, or if they lived, yeah, if they lived someplace else, that's where they would have the right to be counted. That's where their residence would be counted and not in New York.
Charles, you're
I think
muted.
it's
I think
mostly
it's
regarding
applies.
counties, not states. In other words,
Yeah,
if
it
they're up
applies
in
to,
Clinton, if they're up in Clinton County
right.
and they were last living in the Bronx, it would go, census would go to Bronx to that direction of this.
That might be right, but I don't see that. In
That's
these,
what it applies to New York State only, not to Connecticut.
I don't see that. I don't see that in
Well,
all of the
that's what,
cases. I just see that there is a statement that,
but it's an amendment to the New York State Constitution, so it applies only to New York State, not any place else. So, and if somebody's
well,
incarcerated,
I didn't say it applies to any place else, Charles. What I'm saying is,
I mean,
that-
I think both points are correct. That if someone is incarcerated at a facility like Bedford or Taconic, that is a resident of another state, but they are incarcerated within New York State, they would be removed entirely from this process. And if they're incarcerated at one of those facilities, but they are a resident of the city, they'd be counted in the city. So I
I
think
don't
both.
think this is just a city amendment. I think this is a state amendment when it comes to incarcerated people. And New York only cares about those residents, those individuals who are incarcerated and residents in New York State. So that if I lived up in Hudson and I'm incarcerated in Rikers, I could vote in Hudson, not down here. And if I'm incarcerated in Rikers and I live in Connecticut, it's a no, you can't vote in New York.
Unless your last place of residence was in New York City.
Yeah. So the
New
issue
York
isn't the
State.
Well,
voting.
that's what it says. Where's your last place of residence? Wherever you were before you ended up in one of our jails, for New York's purposes, if you were a resident in New York, anywhere in New York, then I'm sure this applies. You can count. If you were not a resident in any place in New York, then I don't think New York cares where you are. You're not going to be considered a voting party in New York. That's
So
the way-
let's,
So to be clear, it's actually not so much an issue for voting. This is the fact that many upstate communities, if we were, as we did through the last census, to count the population of, again, Bedford, Taconic, Sing Sing, or others in those communities, you're adding tons of quote unquote residents, which really are incarcerated people, to historically Republican communities, right? You're arguably adding a very large, often, BIPOC minority population that has no right to participate in local politics to those communities, therefore actually diluting the strength of city representatives and strengthening the hands of these Republican members. So it's
Well, it would
predominantly
go both ways.
Not
It would go both
necessarily,
ways.
yeah.
10 years down the line, 10 years
Yeah.
down the
No,
line,
the point is, but right, no, certainly you can set aside the party part of it, but the point is that you count people where they live so that you truly have, for every district, because they have to be very close in terms of number, that there aren't districts that have sometimes 40,000 people between all the different correctional facilities in them that truly are residents of another community and will return to that community rather than remain active and vocal on issues in, let's say, the North Country or Onondaga.
no, you're right, Louis, on that, absolutely.
so then there are other sections on this. It's very dense. The plan's got to be approved by 7 out of 10 of the commissioners, and then it's got to be approved by a majority of each house of the legislature, the legislative houses. And then if 7 out of 10, if the plan is approved by 7 out of 10, then the next agreed upon plan. So if this plan is not agreed, but there was a plan before that, that was in draft, that was agreed, then they're going to look at that. They're going to be, the legislature would be able to look at that plan. And if that plan wasn't agreed, then they can put up their own plan.
I'm confused. Who's supposed to oversee all of these provisions?
The ultimate okay will be a majority, has to be voted by each legislative body. The Senate, first the commissioners, you have commissioners that I didn't go through because it's complex. Who has a right to become a commissioner, okay? But the final is, first you've got to have the commissioners agree. 7 out of 10 commissioners have to agree on a plan. If they don't agree on the first plan, they go, so you know how we didn't agree to A, but we're closer on a draft on B. Then they get to look at the drafts that they were looking at. And if then nobody agrees to that, the legislature has a right to come up with their own plan. And there is also a date, there are dates here. And I remember talking with one of our representatives about this. These dates, I think one of the dates is the end of January or the first week in February, but I believe it's the end of January. And that's only for this year. For the next time, if this goes through, they have to approve by November. There's another date. But the ones who have to agree ultimately are the two legislative bodies. And I think that they have till the end this for this year, for this petition, they have until January. After that, they have to have a redistricting plan in the future. The redistricting plans are in years that end with an O. Okay? And those are the years that the census are taken. Okay? So 2000, 2000,
2020, 2030, 2040.
Right. Right. In those years, they've got to have this plan ready 2 months before, 2 months earlier. So it would have to be in and around a November deadline. Let me look at this. It is very, very, very complex. I kid you not. It's very, very complex.
It seems to me that there are too many provisions put together in one package.
Right, you're right, Fran, and the too many provisions have to do with proposal number 1. For example, I carved out one of them that says as follows: the Independent Redistricting Commission established pursuant to 5B of this article shall prepare a redistricting plan to establish Senate, Assembly, and congressional districts every 10 years, commencing in 2021, and shall submit to the legislature such plan and the implementing legislation, therefore, on or before November 1st, or as soon as practicable thereafter, but no later than November 15th. In the year ending in parentheses bracket 2, beginning in 2021. So you look at this and you say, this sounds like they're stuck, they're due, they have to have this in by the beginning of November 2021. But that's not really what this year says, because I spoke to Dick Gottfried about it the other night at Carolyn's, and he felt the redistricting plan would be ready sometime in January. And it might be the end of January. And it goes on and on. This first one, this is why I said I'm going backwards. Each house has to approve the plan by a majority. And there are all kinds of provisions that the Speaker of the Assembly and the temporary president of the Assembly have to be members of two different political parties. Then what happens if they're members of the same party? It's just crazy. Here's another provision. When drawing district lines, and you'll notice that Lewis spoke earlier in one of his comments about the lines. When drawing district lines, the commission shall consider whether such lines would result in a denial or abridgment of racial or language minority voting rights, and districts shall not be drawn to have the purpose of, nor shall they result in, the denial or abridgment of such rights. In other words, we're trying to keep people of the same racial and language minority voting rights together. I'm sure right now lines go right through districts. You might have Asians on one side of the line, Asians on the other side of the line, Black communities on one side of the line, Black communities on the other side of the line, where it makes no difference. These are homogeneous groups that should get the right to vote as communities. And it also says districts shall be drawn based on the totality of the circumstances. Now, that to me is a magnificent phrase used for litigation, because totality of the circumstances can be anything, as far as I'm concerned.
1 second,
Rachel?
Sylvia. Roberta has her hand up.
I'm sorry, Roberta, go ahead.
Mean that they couldn't split up Chelsea the way they did. So they took some of us and put us in Jerry Nadler's group, and some of us wound up with Carolyn Maloney.
Frankly, I think that's what it means. I mean, just look, tell me what we really have in common with the East Side.
Nothing.
Nothing.
But I would like to say one other thing, and that is that the Citizens Union is suggesting that we vote no on this question.
Okay, let me just finish reading this a little bit and we'll get to that, because I have two more sentences. Districts shall be drawn so that, based on the totality of the circumstances, racial or minority language groups do not have less opportunity to participate in the political process than other members of the electorate and to elect representatives of their choice. And then I have over here in my own handwriting, each district shall have as equal as possible the same number of inhabitants and be contiguous. So contiguous means side by side, as Louis mentioned before, and as you've mentioned. We want to keep people together. Right now, if you look at the lines, they're absolute. There's absolute insanity. One redistricting goes right down the west side of Manhattan. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Now, let's get back to what you said, Roberta.
Yeah, Citizen Union suggests voting no, although they say that there are some very good things in it. It says that they're most concerned that it would remove the protections that ensure no one party could dominate the redistricting process. And it says by lowering the needed majority and changing voting procedures to approve new maps, the amendment effectively cuts off the minority party from having any influence on the redistricting process. The amendment would also allow the legislature to take over map drawing on January 1st if the Independent Redistricting Commission does not approve a plan by then, virtually inviting the current commission not to be decisive in the meantime. The proposal would come into effect in the midst of redistricting, creating confusion and potentially limiting public input. For generations, New York's redistricting process has been controlled by the party in power. Voters rejected this brazen partisanship in 2014 when they voted to create an independent redistricting commission. While question 1 contains some positive provisions, we feel as though it clears a pathway for the legislature to reclaim influence over redistricting so they can draw lines to protect incumbents and strip the majority party's power. Voters should vote no on question 1.
Okay,
Do
Louis.
you remember years ago when there was it Citizens Union and another group? They gave forums on a fairer way to redistrict. And I remember one of the plans, because I was sitting in the audience, made a lot of sense. And they didn't even approve it. They approved something else in 2014. But I think what you're referring to is what Dick Gottfried was referring to the other night when he said, I think that the legislature is going to approve something in January, which sounds exactly with what you just said, might be back to the old party in power bit. And, that could go for us and that could go against us, because there might be a time we're not in power. Right now we are, but they very easily could go the other way where, and we were at one time for a long time, not in power. Remember, we didn't have, we had one house, we didn't have the other. So I probably would agree with that proposal number one probably needs a lot more thought. The others, as that's why I started backwards. The others appear to be logical. Environmental, sure, we all want clean water. Okay, even the one with the population and the census and where people that are incarcerated should be considered residents, even that makes sense, okay? to bump up the amount of money for civil court judges, that's just completely logical to me. Okay. It's number one, that's the hot potato. And it is, honestly, it is so confusing on how the commissioners are going to be appointed. Okay. 2 members of the commission are to be appointed by the temporary president of the Senate. 2 members shall be appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly. 2 members shall be appointed by the minority leader of the Senate. 2 members shall be appointed by the minority leader of the Assembly. 2 members shall be appointed by the 8 members appointed pursuant to 1 through 4. Now it gets you crazy.
Okay, just hang on. I'm sorry. We see some hands coming up, but Fran, then Charles.
Well, I hope no one's looking at me to be able to answer some of these questions. So I'm looking forward to group participation here, because this is really a hot potato, number one.
If I
Fran,
wanted
you gotta unmute yourself.
sorry.
Who wants to speak?
Fran, you gotta unmute yourself.
Fran, you want to unmute? Fran?
Okay, I got it. This is deliberately made to be so complex so that it doesn't pass. I personally have voted by absentee ballot, and I voted no. There are too many things which intersect. There are too many things that are not going to be in anyone's there's not going to be no one to really oversee it, and there are too many things that fall through the cracks. And I think that's a very deliberate thing. That's
You
why.
mean in the past you voted against this?
No, I voted now. I took my ballot, I voted absentee ballot, and I voted no, because this is, to me, is a clusterfuck, deliberately. This is so that there's not going to be any change, so that the old way prevails. That's my feeling.
Thanks. Charles, then Lewis.
Charles, you have to unmute.
Tomorrow night, we're doing the Zoom class.
I'm unmuted. Okay. Unfortunately, I most likely will vote no on this. Unfortunately, there's some very good points in this amendment that get lost in a slew of words about many other things that confuses people. I mean, the idea of permitting people that are interned to vote, counting of non-citizens, you know, that's fine. The creation of lines for the district lines, these are all very good ideas. The idea of freezing the amount of senators to 63, because there's been a whole history of creating districts that weren't necessary over many years. So that it's a pity that I would like to have this sent back to the state legislature and redone and just and create a better redistricting process than they have right now. Right now, you have 2 conflicting proposals coming out of the redistricting commission, and it will go to the state legislature, and they will choose most likely the Democratic plan because the Democrats are in control. So a lot of this needs to be refined and brought back to the voter at a different time.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm with you. I mean, this is like, I think walking through mud is easier than reading, you know, all these pages that had to do with just the first ballot. I don't know how any resident of the state of New York without, I can't even say a law degree. It's the kind of, it's written in such a way as the people who write the bills It's very convoluted. It's the average person, this is like for a law school test at the graduate level. I mean, it's very, very convoluted. And the average person isn't going to know what they're reading. And they're going to take this ballot, flip it over, and go, yes, 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 or no, 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 unless we go back to where we were in in 2014 in an audience with the two groups, arguing what was the best line to draw and how to draw it. I thought that 2000, everybody was happy with 2014. Obviously, nobody was happy with that either.
Hang on, Louis and Roberta.
You have to unmute, Louis.
No, I'm already unmuted. It's just the stupid hand thing. It's a different thing. So I'm actually supporting this. And I actually have to say, I think the fact that Citizens Union, which does oppose it, but that's not a universal position, doesn't matter. Citizens Union is interested in quote unquote good governance. And I think good governance is fine, Andy. I believe in good governance. But we are a progressive democratic organization. And I don't think that we need to be ashamed about supporting things that support the state's democratic majority. And the reason why they're revising the 2014 regime is we have to remember who was in charge in 2014. The Republicans controlled the Senate. So the thing that they're revising is actually a Republican created process that was intentionally designed to make sure the Republicans always retained power because they saw it coming that the Democrats were going to take over, right? The Democrats
Can you expand upon, wait a second. Can you expand upon what you just said? Because it's an interesting concept, number one. You believe that the 2014 amendment that the voters voted in was actually an amendment that favored the Republicans. And
Correct.
can you tell me how it favored the Republicans? Do you
Because there are
remember?
provisions in the existing 2014 law that say that the rules are different for approving the lines if one party controls both houses of the legislature, right? Then if different parties control different houses of the legislature. And some people can cast as a good governance thing, but that fundamentally means is that they are raising the threshold in order to pass the lines if the Democrats are in control, because there's no scenario in which the Republicans are ever winning back the state assembly. The Republicans have not controlled the state assembly in 54 years. We have over 100 Democratic members of the state assembly and less than 50 Republicans. It's non-viable. So what this did was it said, if the Democrats take the state Senate, they need to get a 2/3 majority to pass these lines. And if the Democrats don't get a majority of the state Senate, they only need a majority of each house to pass these lines. And so what was the system that existed in 2010 when we did this? The assembly, which was Democratic controlled.
You have to talk slower.
Line.
You have to talk slower because you know what you're talking about, but a lot of us don't, and
Right.
I'm included.
Sure. So the old system, right? 3 different bodies effectively drew the 2010 lines, right? So we have congressional lines, we have Senate lines, and we have assembly lines. The assembly was led by Shelley Silver. Shelley Silver drew the assembly lines. The Republicans controlled the Senate. They drew their own lines. And a deal was made that the Senate would pass the assembly's lines, and the assembly would pass the Senate lines. He's controlled it. And then because the Democrats only control one house, the Republicans control another house, and they can't agree on Congress, the federal courts drew the congressional lines, right? So
right.
the old
Talk
system,
slow. Talk
Okay.
slow. Go ahead.
The
You were
old
right. The court
system-
drew the lines.
Right. So the old system was based on a thing where each house drew their own lines, right? And what that did was it cemented Republican power. That's why there are members of our community who are in Robert Jackson's Senate district, because that Senate district was created to mess with Democrats. That Senate district is actually the remnant of, right? So Robert Jackson replaced Adriano Espaillat, but Adriano Espaillat replaced Eric Schneiderman. So way back in 2002, and I know this is ancient history, but it's important. Eric Schneiderman was a pain in the behind of the Senate Republican leader named Joe Bruno. And he wanted to get rid of Eric Schneiderman, but he knew a Republican couldn't beat Eric Schneiderman. So Eric Schneiderman, who lived on like 85th Street, suddenly his district went to Washington Heights and into the Bronx. And why was that? Because the Republicans hoped that if a Latino, if a Hispanic candidate beat Eric Schneiderman, they'd be better to the Republicans than him, right? That's why. So in this community, we have 2 state senators. The Upper West Side, north of us, has 5, right? So what this, and that's what the 2014 system solidified and protects, right? Different people can spin it different ways, but fundamentally what that system did was said that if the Democrats want to fix this system, they have to get a 2/3 majority, which means they have to get Republicans on board, because else the Republicans won't have any votes. And so I do not actually think it is anti-small d Democratic to say that we should have the same rules, the same majority rules, which is the way how we do everything, whether or not the Democrats control the state Senate, or whether or not the Republicans control the state Senate. And that is the only issue in this ballot measure that is at all controversial among non-right wingers, right? The conservatives hate the entire thing, right? But Citizens Union agrees we should get rid of prison-based gerrymandering. We should have contiguous districts. I don't think that there are points about whether or not making this change in the timeline this year are not valid. But again, the current timeline ends after we start petitioning, right? And that's not fair. If some of you, I had an opportunity to talk, and I'm going to stop. I know I'm going on for a while, but I hope
No,
this is
I'm
helpful.
interested in hearing you.
Congressman Nadler tells a story, and I spoke to Jerry recently about many years ago when he was in the state assembly, and they finished the lines the day before petitioning started, right? And suddenly, people that were in the district were no longer in the district. People that were out of the district were suddenly in the district. No one knew what to do. And that's what the current timeline that's in the 2014 amendment does. And that was not intentional, right? Way back in 2014, the primary was in September. We've now moved the primary up. And so maybe it will make for a messy 2022. I'm not going to debate that, but it's important that we do this now. So then 2032 and 2042 and 2052, we have a system that actually is small d Democratic. I mean, that's what fundamentally this thing is. But even if my argument about small d democracy doesn't convince you, I'll just end by saying, I think as a large d Democratic organization, I have no qualms about advocating for things that strengthen the hands of the Democrats, particularly when the entire US Congress, all 435 seats, control of the entire Congress may hinge on whether or not the New York State legislature draws a congressional map that is good enough for the Democrats for us to maintain our very thin majority. And with that, I yield back. Thanks for your patience.
Okay,
So I
Roberta?
gather that,
Sorry.
you know, I've had these discussions with you before, even with the judiciary, where we've had a fundamental difference of, you know, swing votes and things like that. And I think that, I think on some level, Lewis is saying, you grab power when you can grab power. We're in power, grab it and run with it. You know, that's a side of the big D that, you know, we've earned the opportunity to have power when we didn't have it for so long. Anybody else got questions here? Because this is a very, very convoluted issue, and I certainly can understand Lewis's points, to be frankly honest with you.
We have Roberta, David, then Joe.
Can I share my screen? Can I,
Uh,
whoever is the owner?
I'm gonna have to, let's see, hang on.
I'll go to participants. It's under participants. No, maybe not. I forget where it is. I can't see it because I'm not the host.
Okay, when I make you, then afterwards, it doesn't allow me to make you co-host and makes you the host, but then send it back to me after.
That's fine. I mean, there's a
Okay.
way to allow people to share their screens without making them the host. Okay, doesn't matter. What I'd like to hear about, Lewis, if you could you just address what's in the citizens union's, you know, opposition? Because when I read it, it sounded like they made some very good points. So I'd really like to, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm really confused because it says it would remove the protections that ensure one political party could dominate the redistricting process. And then, you know, and these other points. So could you address this? Because I'd really like to understand this.
No, I mean, yeah, no, definitely. I think that, I mean, I say this without being judgmental. I think that that's definitely another spin on these provisions, right? Like one way to spin these provisions that were created in 2014 is that special provisions were created that if the Democrats control both houses of the legislature, the minority party, the Republicans, will still have power. And I don't think it's at all incongruous for Citizens Union's position, which is a good government position, right? To say that we should always create a system where both parties have a voice. So I completely understand, I completely respect their position. It just happens to be that my position is that I think that their pursuit of quote unquote good governance is really also a handicapping of an overly democratic state, and saying that even if 2/3 of the state has effectively elected a Democratic legislature, right? There's over 40 members of the state Senate who are Democrats and like 22 who are Republicans, the Republicans should still have a voice. And I think it's just a philosophical difference, right? And that's like, I don't disrespect their position. I think that their position, right, again, always is, you should always make sure both parties have a voice. And my position is, I am a Democrat, Saratoga elected Democrats, Albany elected Democrats. We should be able to, as Democrats, if we have a majority, pass things by majority rule, and that the Republicans will never control the state assembly. So this was not designed to protect Democrats against Republicans. It was only designed to protect Republicans
Against
from
Democrats.
But
But
again,
this-
I respect their position.
Yeah, this is Common Cause. Common Cause is saying vote yes. Another good government group, you know, Eric sent this out, and these guys are saying vote yes on number 1. So
Well, that's what Lewis is saying. Vote yes on number 1.
Right.
And I think in a way, believe it or not, it makes sense. Too bad for the Republicans. Too bad. The Democrats are in power. I know it could switch the other way, but it may not switch for a long time.
Yeah. I agree with Lewis, and part of in the real world, because we're in the real world, maybe in an ideal world, I wouldn't. You can be for sure. I've read somewhere in one of the periodicals somewhere that, the Texas Republicans are going to skew it, and all these Republican states are going to skew their thing to their favor. New York might be the state that can hold the balance nationally. So, I mean, the Republicans, screwed us for so many years. I hate to say, well, let's, don't be as bad as they are. But unfortunately, in the real world, especially in national politics where things are at such a dangerous edge now, this could prevent Trump from becoming president via our congressional delegation. If we get rid of it, if we expand Staten Island's, the congressional district into a very liberal Brooklyn district. I mean, like I say, give Carolyn's Greenpoint and Williamsburg to Nicole Malliotakis, give Nicole all the progressive areas. I mean, no, that was just a joke. But seriously, I mean, so this has national implications to it. And in 10, 12 years anyway, people are going to vote on it again when the census comes up. So I think, unfortunately, we have to play hardball, and like Lewis said, and we are a partisan Democrat club. If we were a good government group, the situation might be different. So I would vote yes. Lewis, thank you for your ideas. And Sylvia.
Oh,
Hey,
I happen
Joe?
to agree with Lewis. And normally I disagree with him, especially with the judiciary, but he makes a very, very good argument. Who else has something to say
Yeah,
here?
I'll be
Oh.
quick. I think I was up, Sylvia. But,
And then
I'll be
Luana
quick
after.
here since David and Lewis already talked about this. But yeah, I was going to say I think I'm a yes vote on this for a couple of reasons. There are several good government groups who do support it. I think Lewis made some really good points about who's being protected here. I also think, not to know thy enemy, but it's like the Republicans massively oppose this and see it as a huge power grab. And reading that, I mean, I was like, okay, let's do it. Power grab. Let's power grab. This is the time, for all the obvious reasons. And I mean, the Democrats across the Assembly and the state Senate already voted to support it. So I agree. It is too much jammed into one. Going back to what we initially talked about, I couldn't agree more. But seeing it be supported by state Democrats, opposed by state Republicans, and I think it's the right move. So I'm also a yes vote. But that's all I'll say.
Thanks, Joe. Luana?
Yeah, hi
Unmute.
everyone. So, as Sylvia was saying, this is a very convoluted proposal, so it's hard to read. But some of the things that made me want to vote yes on this is in terms of the incarcerated. So most of the incarcerated are generally Democrats, right? Unfortunately. And so if you're adding incarcerated individuals and undocumented individuals to the census and also counting them in the redistricting of the lines, then that would add to the Democratic majority. So that would also add to the amount of the widening of the district lines, I would say. So I can't speak like Lewis, but when you consider all those things, it outweighs the deficit, where it's kind of confusing where you have the different leaders. But if you look at the members of the committee and the majority and the minority of the leaders, they're all of the members. There are 4 of the Democrats, 4 of the Republicans, and 2 members who are not aligned with any party. And so it would then be required a simple majority in the state legislature to approve the commission's plan. So whatever the plan is, you would only need a majority. So if the census is leaning toward the Democrats in terms of adding the incarcerated and the undocumented to the numbers, it would increase our amount of power in each district. So that's one, those are the things that I looked at in terms of the plan. Sylvia, you had mentioned the proposal would be required the commission to submit their plan. This changes it to January 1st of 2022.
It gets very crazy.
That's where it gets complicated.
It's crazy. When I saw Dick Gottfried the other night at Carolyn's, we engaged in a conversation about, I asked him, when do you think these lines are going to be done? And he said, frankly, I think the lines will be done, will be finished by the legislature. He specifically said legislature sometime in January. And all I could think of is, sometime in January. And I'm saying to myself, well, we've got the civil court panel that's got to come out. My head is spinning about, putting the petition together. The petition has to be ready to roll the way everybody lines up to see who's going to get their petitions first and get out there and start petitioning. And when something's in January, it's in the backyard of your, you don't, as district leaders, there's not much time to do anything. You're fighting with the printers. We usually get our way. We put cash on the table. Here, take it, give me the bill. And that's the end of the story. But it's very tough because we've got civil court candidates that have to go on. We have to see who's going to be running against whom. It's wild. But he did say to me sometime in January, which is 2002. And this proposal here, this was Eric's. Eric was nice enough to send this around in an e-blast the other day. So I pulled it down.
Yeah, I got it too.
Like, give me a break. How do you digest this? You've got to be on the bill writing committee. Even rules for the county isn't this bad.
So can I ask you a question? How do you count incarcerated people? And most undocumented aliens are afraid of census and questioning. So how are these individuals counted?
Well, you'll remember, I believe, that the Supreme Court said that for the purposes of the census, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, this went to that issue, went to the Supreme Court. Did you have to be, if you were an undocumented citizen, if you were an undocumented person in the United States, did you have a right to be counted? And some said no, some said yes. The Supreme Court of the country said you had to count them.
Okay.
For the purpose of the census. And I believe that came out, that ruling came out while the census takers were out there.
I remember there was a controversy.
So
yeah.
I think the issue, I remember Julie Menon talking about this, the issue was that undocumented people would be afraid to even come to the door. They weren't even going to open the door, which makes sense. If I was an undocumented person, I'm not letting you through my door. I probably wouldn't let you through my door even if I counted. I'm not going to go in there and tell you it's my mother, it's my brother, it's my sister, because whoever answers the door has to tell the census person who's in the house, who's dwelling in the house.
And the incarcerated, how are they counted?
Where's Lewis? I'll let him answer that. I think that they have to go. I think for this purpose of this amendment, to me, New York only cares about who's going to be counted in a New York vote. But I'll let Lewis. Lewis, can you illuminate
Sure. So
us?
what's interesting about this thing about where people are incarcerated or counted is that this is actually already law. So we actually did this ahead of the 2010
This is already what?
This has actually already been passed into law. So we actually already did this 10 years ago. It just so happens that the Democrats have decided that they want to codify it in the Constitution. So actually, we already eliminated this when we did this last time.
2010? This was eliminated?
2010, yeah.
And what did it say in 2010? As
That-
far as incarcerated people?
That incarcerated people will be counted at their last known address.
Okay, so it just, I get it. So we're just amending, we're making it permanent. It's now an
Right,
amendment.
we're making it permanent. It's like the thing where we're capping the state Senate district at 63. It's to prevent the Republicans, if they were to take control again,
From adding.
from changing it back.
But how are they counted? So what, do they go in the jails and they count the people that stay and find out where their last known address was, or?
Yeah, so I mean, each incarcerated individual is given a census form like
Okay.
everyone else, and on the census form, they will indicate their actual permanent address or lack thereof.
Oh,
And then we use that data.
okay. Thank you.
So they also do this in homeless shelters and stuff like that. Like when they do the census, they have to enumerate all those people. So all those individuals who are given forms and surveys are done on the streets as well for the unhoused.
Okay, thank you. So
Fran?
yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think it has. I think the
Oh, one
weight
second,
of.
one second.
I'm sorry. The weight has more pros than cons for me. So I would vote yes.
The point,
Thank you, Luana.
we've tried to follow the people without papers who are not citizens of the United States. So my presumption is that there are there's an algorithm that they use. For example, we have been talking about 11 million undocumented people in the United States for years and years and years. Someone had to come up with this guesstimate based upon, I'm not sure what, but an algorithm. So I think that's how that would be taken care of. People don't fill out census forms.
Did Jerry have something to say? Jerry? No? I want to.
I just have questions, that's all. And actually, Fran kind of addressed my last question. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? This is really, we're not gonna, look, we're all going to the polls and we're all individual voters.
There's a young lady, Diana. She has a question. She has a hand up.
Diana, okay.
I don't know if am I unmuted?
Yes, you are unmuted.
Oh, hi there, Sylvia and everybody else. I put this in the chat before, but it goes backwards a little bit. But my question that I wrote here, going back to one of those things I think was under item number 1 is, so if this thing now that they want to cap the senators at 50, and we're currently at 63, but it says it's already in the Constitution that it's 50. So if it's in 50, my question is then how did we get to 60 to begin with?
I think we have 63 now, and they want to freeze it at 63. So you can never make the number smaller or larger.
But the way it's written, it says it's 50 as is currently written in the Constitution.
Well, yeah, they want to, well, that's how you amend it. You know, they want to change that number from 50 to what the actual number is right now, which is 63, and freeze it at 63 so it never goes higher and it never goes lower.
But how did it get to be 63 if 50 was in the Constitution to begin with? That's what
Well, obviously, the Republicans added senators,
okay.
am I right?
I'm just
Somebody, wasn't us, it had to be the legislature, it had to be one of the two parties. And so,
So does that mean some districts have 2 representatives as opposed to?
well, remember, it goes by population and it also goes by Senate districts. Senate districts are much larger than assembly districts. Much larger. And they swing down in our area right now. Like Brad's area goes from water to water. Goes right across.
Well, I mean, I guess as other people have stated here, the fact that there's 6 items under this one question, which the voters get to say yes or no on, is absurd because there's too much, there's too much wiggle that you can't answer yes or no when you have a 6-part question put in a 1-part.
It's so dense, Diane.
Yes.
It is so dense. It's so thick that I don't know how. The others are easy. That's why I started backwards. The others are easy. They're logical. I mean, who's not going to vote for clean water?
Right.
I mean, this makes sense. There you go, Jerry. This makes sense. It's this number 1 that's the stinker. The number 1 is the.
It makes it also it makes it confusing for voters.
I don't think I think the voters, having lived through this, and I've had a short discussion with my co-leader about it. These petitions are going, it's one thing to have a petition that's long, but we're going to have 2 petitions. And on the back of one of these, it's not going to be an 8 by 10. It's going to be very, very long. We're going to have to roll it up. And even when we go out to petition, people are going to say, what's the say on the back? They're going to look to us because that's what people do. They look at the person who's got the petition in their hand. And they said, well, these things on the back, what does it mean on the back? What's it going to mean when we go into the polls? They're not going to sit there and read it. The public doesn't have the patience to read proposal number 1. Maybe we should have forums on it or something like that.
Should have been broken down.
And I don't want to run it. It's too confusing.
So then we have Louis, then David.
All right, so I thought I'd do a little bit more explanation about this 50 business. So I'm going to start by putting the actual language from the Constitution into the chat, which is much more complicated than what it means. So basically, what happened was in 1894, there were 50 state senators. Upstate got worried there were too many Irish in New York City. And what they were worried about was that if more Irish kept on growing in New York City, they would lose state senators in Albany. Because you have to remember in 1894, this is before the doctrine of one person, one vote. So back then, the state senate was done purely by geography. The districts were not necessarily full of the same number of people at all, but they really were done by counties. And so what it meant was that if Manhattan or Brooklyn ended up having enough population, they needed more than 3 state senators rather than the 4th state senator coming from Albany or Cattaraugus in the North Country, they would just get an extra state senator. That's what all that gobbledygook that I put in the chat means. I'm not even going to bother to read it because it makes no sense. So but no one really knows what it means and the courts don't really care. So basically every 10 years we've added state senators on this basis. We had 57 in the 1960s and we went up to 60 in 1972. We went to 61 in 1982. We went to 62 in 2002. We went to 63 in 2012 because the Republicans would draw little pieces of state senate districts into a county so that there were 3 people that had like a little piece of like Buffalo, and they would say, oh, that means we get to create another district in Buffalo because there's more people that fit in these 3 districts. So it makes absolutely no sense, but there actually hasn't been 50 districts in well over 100 years, because, I mean, again, the thing that I put in the chat's indecipherable. So
There's your
hopefully,
answer, Diana.
Yeah, that's really interesting what he just said. That's
Right.
fascinating history. Thanks, thank you.
sure.
Amazing. Thanks.
David?
Yeah, I guess the threat of Tammany reared its head. My question to Sylvia is, it confused me a little bit when you said on the back of the petition, is this just for 2022 or this is going to be forever? And what's going to
Ballot? I meant the ballot, because when we're petitioning, very frequently, the people that you're asking for their signature, they will say, I remember the last time we had amendments. People said, what do the amendments say?
Yeah, but when we petition, we don't even know what the amendments are. We're just dealing with candidates, right? I'm a
They
little
still ask you, David, what do the amendments, what are they gonna say? You'll
you
see,
mean from,
you'll see, they'll say it. Because there's gonna be a lot, everybody's gonna be reading their emails. Everywhere you turn around in New York, especially in the city, there's gonna be a lot of talk, a lot of email, a lot of press, a lot of discussion on New York One and on stations about these amendments.
we're voting on these amendments in November of 2021. We're going to probably be petitioning, I'm assuming, in February or March of 2022. So we won't have any idea what's going to be on the ballot in 2022 in terms of amendments.
These amendments are going to be on, I think, our petitions.
I'm confused, but okay.
Yeah.
The amendments are going to be on the
Yeah.
petitions?
Yeah. Next year, then we're right around the corner. We're going to be petitioning again. I think these amendments are going to be on our petitioning in February.
I've never seen amendments on our petitions. I've seen
I don't
candidates.
mean petitions, I mean the ballots. When you go to vote, okay? You're gonna be voting on these.
Yeah, but they're not, can I say something? They're not gonna be on, they should not be on the petition. They're not for a primary. They're not in the primary at all. This is on a general election of November 20.
I remember someone telling me they're gonna be on the petitions.
Now, these are amendments to the Constitution, so it doesn't require to be
It
on a
was
primary.
somebody from the Board of Elections, and that the petitions were gonna be very, very long.
I'm very surprised to hear that.
And maybe it's the ballot, when we actually go to vote, that the ballot is gonna be really long. And
I
then,
think it's the
Well,
ballot.
that's different, but this has nothing to do.
well, I've said a
petitioning.
number of times, Charles, I've
But-
said a number of times.
But Sylvia, our petition,
It could be the ballot I'm talking about.
yeah, I think you're talking
They're
about.
still gonna ask you.
Because
when
Sylvia, because the petitions that we circulate are for the primary. And amendments
I know
have nothing to do with the primary, so it's only
I
the
know
general
that, and
election.
when you go to the primary, you'll see people are gonna ask you about the amendments.
It's not gonna be on the primary ballot. It's gonna be on the general election ballot.
They're
of
still
November.
gonna ask you, that's all I'm saying, Charles.
Oh,
I
they
don't
can
know why
ask
you're
you
disputing me. I'm saying that people are people. We're out there with petitions. They're gonna ask you.
about the ballot.
Even if they're not on the petitions, they're going to ask you.
Oh, okay, all right, I agree with that. Yeah, they might.
They did
Yeah.
before. People don't change.
They
This is
might.
gonna be, you know, a big issue.
I disagree. I don't think it's gonna be a big issue, but these things are never big issues, but
It was the last time in 2014. It was about the first question was the drawing of the lines was a very, very big issue
Fine.
Every single solitary politician was involved. The stadiums were
Okay.
packed where they were having forums on this.
Okay.
I
Good
see Liz
governance.
You're
has her
right.
hand up.
And have discussion. I'll be right.
Go ahead, Liz.
Oh, hey, I'm sorry I was late to the meeting, but I do think the problem with the First Amendment is that there's some good things to it and there's some bad things to it. But I do think that the troubling thing about the amendment is that right now it's written, like getting rid of the Democrat Republican lines. It's fine now when the Democrats have a super majority in the House and the Senate. But what happens after a next couple incarnations and they've gotten rid of this Democrat Republican bipartisanship on the redistricting? And I think that's a little bit short-sighted. And I don't know if you guys have already talked about that, but I do think that that's one of the inherent problems. I think, I joined when they were talking about how do you count the incarcerated. And I think a problem with counting incarcerated people is I think a lot of incarcerated people are homeless, so they don't have a primary address. So, and I think if a lot of people continue to leave New York with the pandemic, then the 63 district is going to count against New York City, although, counting on and hoping that New York really bounces back the way we all want it to, it should be a non-issue. But I think the bigger issue is that I think getting rid of the bipartisanship on the committee is just, at this point, it favors the Democrats because they have that majority. But I think ultimately that might be something that's a little bit troubling down the line. I don't know if we talked about that.
Yeah, we did a little bit. And
But-
then we talked about little Democrat, the D, and the big Democrat, the big D, and, good government versus democratic power, that maybe we should, as Lewis feels, grab it while you can. That the 2000.
But is this? But it's not really. It's kind of a fictional grab, if it's not statutorily in place. Because what if the Democrats don't have the majority anymore?
Go ahead,
So
Lewis.
it's
Your turn.
Yeah, and I mean, so to be clear, on the commission itself, it actually does not eliminate the bipartisanship, right? The commission itself,
but the
will
amendment
all-
does.
No, the amendment does not change the composition of the commission at all. The temporary president of the Senate, which is the majority leader, minority leader, the speaker, and the semi-minority leader will all make their appointments, and then those 8 appointments will make other appointments. It changes the bipartisanship requirement when the legislature moves to adopt the lines. And it's not even officially bipartisanship requirement. It's an effective bipartisanship requirement by requiring a 2/3 majority. Oh, no, I mean, Liz, actually, no. I guess I understand what you mean. So actually, sort of clarify. It does not remove the bipartisanship requirement for the composition of the commission. It removes the bipartisanship requirement for who can vote to
Yes.
move a recommendation forward. But under any circumstances, the Democrats have as many appointees on the commission as the Republicans, even if the Democrats are in the minority in the legislature. And again, because the commission lines are not the final lines, arguably the impact of that is minimal. But I mean, what I would say is that I think the odds of Democrats ever losing these majorities is incredibly small. And what I was sort of sharing earlier is that some of these systems were actually designed specifically because the Republicans believe that the Democrats will never lose the majority. So in 2014, they wrote in protections for themselves. Right. And so, yes, this would remove protections for the minority party, but that's because all involved agree the Republicans will never win back the legislature. Whether that's true or not, I mean, I think can be debated. but certainly Joe Bruno, who was in charge when this happened, was certainly under, and then Dean Skelos was certainly under the impression that that would never occur.
Oh. Two horrible names, Louis. Thank you for bringing those. I'm gonna have
I'm
nightmares.
sorry.
So I agree with Louis on that, because in the reading it says that the redistricting for New York is led by the 10-member independent redistricting commission, which includes 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 2 members, and 2 members that are not aligned with either party. So that's already bipartisan. And then the other part of it, it says that the proposals, it would require a majority, a simple majority in the state legislature to approve the commission's plan. So the proposal would also allow the commission to appoint 2 co-executive directors, regardless of their political party, by a simple majority vote. So it does include bipartisanship in its amendment in that area. Doesn't eliminate it.
Who was that? Fran?
All right.
Was
That
that?
was Luana, but no, that was Luana. But is any? Yeah. So good points brought up by everyone. I don't know if there's any other questions for Sylvia or for Louis. I know Mindy had to run, so I'm just taking over hosting the call for
I
now.
am technically, certainly not the rocket scientist on this one.
I was looking for Liz to see
It
what
was
she had to
very
add.
instructive, though. Thank you.
So as we conclude this round of an hour and a half, that went fast. I want to thank, it's in. I want to thank Louis, and I want to thank everybody, my co-leader, everyone for participating. Liz, for coming in, despite the fact that you said you would be late. We knew it, but I mean, it's important that everybody jump in and, you know, even figure out what it says. This is dense stuff. And I think we did a good job. So, you know, thank you, Louis. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, everyone. If anybody has any question, it's probably.
Sylvia, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you,
It's
Sylvia.
either,
That was
you
very
know,
Informative.
Yes, that was tough.
ask your questions now or forever hold your peace, because we're going to say, you know, like Carol Burnett, night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
everybody.
Don't forget to vote.
Yeah, don't forget to vote, right.
Don't worry, I'll send you 800 reminders between now and now on the
Good night, guys.
blast.